What happens when an entitled HOA Karen decides to vandalize United States military property? Well, buckle up, because I'm about to tell you the most insane story of HOA overreach that resulted in a $450,000 fine and the complete destruction of one woman's life. This is the story of how a power-drunk homeowners association board member thought she could tag a U.S. Navy patrol boat with spray paint and walk away scot-free. Spoiler alert, the federal government had other plans. My name is HOA Karen Exposed, and if you love stories of instant karma and justice served, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because this story is about to blow your mind. Our story begins in the peaceful waterfront community of Bayshore Heights, located just outside of Norfolk, Virginia. Now, if you know anything about Norfolk, you know it's one of the largest naval bases in the world. The entire area is basically military central, with thousands of active duty service members, veterans, and Department of Defense contractors calling it home. I'd been living in Bayshore Heights for about 3 years when this incident happened. I'm a retired Navy Chief Petty Officer with 22 years of service, and I'd chosen this community specifically because of its proximity to the base and its supposed military-friendly atmosphere. The neighborhood had everything: beautiful waterfront homes, a private marina, and what I thought was a reasonable homeowners association. Boy, was I wrong about that last part. The HOA board was run by a woman named Karen Fitzgerald, and yes, her name was actually Karen. I couldn't make this up if I tried. She was in her mid-50s, always wore those designer pantsuits that screamed, "I want to speak to your manager," and had this perfectly styled blonde bob that looked like it could deflect bullets. She'd been the HOA president for 6 years and ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist. Now, I'd had a few run-ins with Karen before. She'd tried to fine me for having an American flag that was too large. It was a standard 3.5-foot flag on a proper flagpole. She'd complained about my truck being too military-looking. It was a black Ford F-150 with veterans' license plates. But what happened next took things to a whole new level of insanity. It was a Thursday morning in early September when everything started. I was having my coffee on the back deck enjoying the view of the marina when I noticed something unusual. A Navy Mark VI patrol boat was being guided into one of the larger slips at the end of the dock. Now, for those who don't know, a Mark VI is a serious piece of military hardware, 85 feet long, armed to the teeth, and worth about $15 million. I immediately recognized what was happening. Sometimes when naval vessels need minor maintenance or when crews need a secure place to dock during training exercises, they'll use civilian marinas that have agreements with the Navy. Our marina had such an agreement, though it was rarely used. I walked down to the dock to chat with the crew. The boat commander, a lieutenant named Rodriguez, explained they'd be here for about 48 hours, while they waited for a part to be delivered for repairs. They had all the proper paperwork, had coordinated with the marina management, and had paid all necessary fees. Everything was completely above board. But here's where Karen enters the picture. About an hour after the patrol boat arrived, I saw Karen marching down the dock in her 4-inch heels, clipboard in hand, and that look on her face that meant someone was about to get fined. She was followed by 2 other board members, her usual flying monkeys who backed up everything she did. I could hear Karen from 50 feet away. Excuse me," she was shouting at the sailors on deck. "This vessel is in violation of HOA regulations." Lieutenant Rodriguez, professional as always, came to the rail to address her. "Ma'am, we have authorization to be here from the marina management. This is a U.S. Navy vessel on official business." Karen's face turned red. "I don't care if you're the Navy, the Marines, or the Coast Guard. This marina is governed by HOA rules, and we have strict regulations about boat size, appearance, and those weapons." She was pointing at the mounted guns, which were clearly secured and unmanned. "Ma'am," Rodriguez tried again, "this is a military vessel. We're not subject to HOA regulations. We have federal authority to be here." That's when Karen made her first big mistake.
Federal authority? I'll show you authority. You have 24 hours to remove this eyesore or I'll have it towed. The sailors on deck actually laughed. One of them called out, "Lady, good luck finding a tow company that'll touch a U.S. Navy."
Warship! Karen stormed off, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was planning something, and knowing Karen, it was going to be spectacularly stupid. The next morning, Friday, I woke up around 600. Old military habits die hard. I made my coffee and walked out onto my deck to watch the sunrise. That's when I saw it and I nearly dropped my mug. Someone had spray-painted HOA Violation, remove immediately in bright orange paint across the hull of the Mark VI, but that wasn't all. They'd also painted illegal parking on the dock next to it and had plastered about 24 HOA violation notices all over the boat's superstructure. I immediately grabbed my phone and started recording video. This was beyond anything I'd imagined even Karen would do. As I was filming, I saw Lieutenant Rodriguez and several sailors discover the damage. The look on their faces went from confusion to shock to absolute fury. Rodriguez immediately got on his radio. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught phrases like vandalism of government property and need NCIS immediately. Within minutes, the entire boat crew was documenting everything, taking photos from every angle. I walked down to offer my footage as evidence. Rodriguez thanked me and asked if I'd seen anything. I hadn't witnessed the actual vandalism, but I had a pretty good idea who was responsible. "Sir," one of the sailors said to Rodriguez, "base security is sending a team, and NCIS says they'll be here within the hour." That's when Karen appeared at the end of the dock, coffee cup in hand with the biggest smirk on her face. She actually had the audacity to walk up to the boat and loudly proclaim, "Oh my, look at this mess. I guess someone really wants you to know you're violating HOA rules. You have until noon to remove this vessel, or I'll be filing formal complaints with the city." Rodriguez, maintaining his military bearing despite his obvious anger, simply said, "Ma'am, I suggest you leave this area immediately. This is now a federal crime scene." Karen laughed. "Crime scene for a little graffiti, don't be so dramatic. Besides, you can't prove who did it." Within an hour, the marina was swarming with federal agents. NCIS had arrived, along with base security, and even a few FBI agents who specialized in crimes against government property. They immediately secured the scene and started interviewing everyone. The investigation moved fast. Real fast. See, what Karen didn't realize was that the marina had recently upgraded its security system. There were high-definition cameras covering every inch of the docks, including infrared night vision cameras. The marina manager, a former Navy guy himself, was more than happy to provide all the footage to the investigators. I was interviewed by an NCIS agent named Special Agent Chen. She was thorough, professional, and seemed particularly interested in my previous interactions with Karen. "Has Mrs. Fitzgerald shown hostility toward military personnel before?" Agent Chen asked. I told her about the flag incident, the complaints about my truck, and various other run-ins I'd witnessed between Karen and other veterans in the neighborhood. "And did you see her near the vessel last night?" "No, but she was here yesterday afternoon making threats about having it towed. She seemed pretty upset that the sailors wouldn't acknowledge her authority." Agent Chen nodded and made notes. "We'll need a written statement from you. Are you willing to testify if this goes to court?" "Absolutely," I said without hesitation. By noon, I noticed agents had started interviewing other neighbors. Word spread quickly through the community about what had happened. The mood was mixed. Some people were shocked that anyone would vandalize military property, while others, mostly Karen's supporters, tried to downplay it as just a prank or making a point about HOA rules. It was around 3 p.m. when things got really interesting. I was on my deck again. I'd basically camped out there all day to watch the drama unfold, when I saw 3 black SUVs pull up to Karen's house. Federal agents got out, walked up to her door, and knocked. I could actually hear Karen's shriek from my house when they showed her their badges. Within minutes, they were walking her out in handcuffs. She was screaming about her rights, demanding her lawyer, and insisting this was all a misunderstanding. This is harassment. She yelled. I'm the HOA president. I was enforcing neighborhood rules. You can't arrest me for doing my job. One of the agents calmly replied, Ma'am, you're under arrest for vandalism of government property, destruction of military assets, and interfering with military operations. You have the right to remain silent. As they drove her away, her husband came running out of the house, phone in hand, presumably calling their lawyer. The entire neighborhood was watching by this point. People were standing in their driveways, peering through windows and recording with their phones. Within hours, the story hit local news. HOA president arrested for vandalizing Navy vessel was the headline on every channel. The news crews showed up and started interviewing neighbors. Most people suddenly didn't want to talk on camera, but a few veterans in the neighborhood didn't hold back. She's had it coming for years. One former Marine told a reporter. She's been harassing military families since she took over the HOA. This time she went too far. The security footage was damning. The marina's cameras had captured everything in crystal clear detail. At 2:47 a.m., Karen was seen walking onto the dock carrying a bag. She spent about 20 minutes spray painting the boat and posting notices. She even took selfies with her vandalism. I guess she wanted trophies of her crime. But here's where it gets even more insane. During the investigation, agents discovered this wasn't Karen's first rodeo with vandalism. She'd apparently been leaving anonymous nasty notes and minor property damage for veterans in the neighborhood for years. They found evidence on her computer, including draft letters and photos she'd taken of her previous work. The federal prosecutor threw the book at her. The charges included willful injury or depredation of property of the United States, Title 18, Section 1361, vandalism of military property, interfering with military operations, multiple counts of harassment of military personnel, conspiracy charges. Related to her past actions, each charge carried serious penalties. The prosecutor explained that the damage to the Mark VI wasn't just about paint. The Navy had to completely inspect the vessel for security breaches, check all systems for tampering, and ensure no classified materials were compromised. The investigation and repairs would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Karen's lawyer tried to argue that she was just an overzealous HOA president who didn't understand the severity of her actions. That defense fell apart when prosecutors presented her emails to other board members where she explicitly stated she wanted to teach these military thugs that they don't own this neighborhood. The trial was relatively quick. With the video evidence, witness testimonies, and Karen's own digital trail, conviction was almost certain. I testified about her pattern of harassment toward veterans. Other neighbors came forward with their own stories. Even some former HOA board members testified that Karen had advocated for illegal actions against military families in the past. The judge, a veteran himself, did not hold back during sentencing. He called Karen's actions an appalling display of disrespect for the men and women who serve our country, and a federal crime committed with malice and premeditation. The sentence, months in federal prison, suspended to 6 months with 12 months probation, 500 hours of community service at veterans organizations, a $450,000 fine to cover the full cost of the investigation, security review, and repairs, a permanent restraining order keeping her 1,000 feet away from any military installation or personnel lifetime, ban from serving on any HOA board. The $450,000 fine was the real kicker. It included $75,000 for the direct cost of repairs and repainting, $125,000 for the security investigation, and system checks, $100,000 for the cost of repositioning another vessel to cover the Mark VI mission, $150,000 in additional fines and penalties. Karen's lawyer argued the fine was excessive, but the judge countered that she had committed a premeditated act of vandalism against a $15 million military asset during a time of heightened global tensions. The fallout was swift and brutal. Karen's husband filed for divorce before she even started serving her sentence. Their house went on the market within a month. Turns out that $450,000 fine wiped out most of their savings and retirement. The HOA board immediately voted to remove her as president, but the damage to their reputation was done. Within 3 months, the entire board had resigned. A special election was held, and the new board was made up entirely of veterans and military spouses, who immediately reversed most of Karen's ridiculous rules. The first act of the new board, installing a permanent plaque at the marina commemorating the service of all military members in the community. The second act, formally apologizing to every veteran who had been harassed during Karen's reign of terror. Lieutenant Rodriguez and his crew sent a letter to the community thanking everyone for their support during the investigation. The Navy also sent a formal commendation to the marina manager for his cooperation and for maintaining the security footage that proved crucial to the case. As for the Mark VI patrol boat, it was fully repaired and returned to service. I heard from some buddies still active that it became something of a legend in the fleet. Sailors would joke about it being the only Navy vessel ever tagged by an HOA Karen. It's been 2 years since this incident, and the neighborhood has completely transformed. The new HOA board focuses on actual community improvements rather than petty violations. We now host quarterly barbecues for military families, have a Memorial Day ceremony at the marina, and even secured a grant to provide discounted marina slips for veterans. Karen served her 6 months in minimum security federal prison. Last I heard, she was living in a small apartment 2 towns over, working at a retail store to pay off her remaining legal debts. The $450,000 fine, plus legal fees, basically bankrupted her. She's still doing her community service. Ironically, she was assigned to help with administrative tasks at a veterans food bank. Her former flying monkeys on the HOA board scattered to the wind. 2 moved out of the neighborhood entirely, and the others keep very low profiles. One actually came up to me at the grocery store and apologized for enabling Karen's behavior for so many years. The marina has become something of a tourist attraction for military personnel. Sailors from the base sometimes come by just to see the famous slip where Karen met karma. The marina manager installed a small museum-quality display about the incident, with Navy approval, that includes some of the news coverage and a reminder about respecting military property. This whole incident taught the community several valuable lessons. First, HOA power is not absolute. Federal law trumps HOA regulations every single time, especially when it comes to military operations and property. No HOA rule gives anyone the right to vandalize property, especially government property. Second, actions have consequences. Karen thought her position as HOA president made her untouchable. She believed she could bully military families and vandalize a Navy vessel without repercussions. That $450,000 fine and federal conviction proved otherwise. Third, documentation is crucial. The marina security system and the digital trail Karen left behind sealed her fate. In today's world, assume everything you do is being recorded. Fourth, community matters. When the veterans and military families in our neighborhood finally stood together, we were able to create positive change. The new HOA board has made Bayshore Heights a model for military-friendly communities. Fifth, respect for service members shouldn't be optional. Whether you agree with military policies or not, the men and women who serve deserve basic respect, especially in their own communities. What Karen did wasn't just stupid. It was a federal crime with serious national security implications. When civilians tamper with military property, it triggers massive investigations because authorities have to assume the worst. Was it just vandalism, or was someone trying to plant a device? Was it a disgruntled HOA president, or a foreign agent testing security responses? The $450,000 fine might seem excessive to some, but consider the resources that had to be mobilized. NCIS agents, FBI investigators, Navy security personnel, Forensic teams, legal staff, hundreds of man-hours went into investigating and prosecuting this case. A Mark 6 patrol boat had to be pulled from operational duties. Another vessel had to cover its missions. The ripple effects of one person's entitled action spread throughout the entire Naval Command structure. This is why federal prosecutors take these cases so seriously. It's not about the spray paint. It's about the precedent. If Karen had gotten away with a slap on the wrist, what message would that send? That anyone can vandalize military property if they claim they're enforcing HOA rules. That would be chaos. The military has to maintain strict security protocols, and that means coming down hard on anyone who violates them, regardless of their motivations. Karen learned this lesson the hard way, and her case serves as a warning to others who might think they can mess with military assets. The Karen incident, as it came to be known, had impacts far beyond our little neighborhood. The case was studied at military law conferences and HOA management seminars. Several states introduced legislation clarifying that HOA rules cannot supersede federal military authority in any circumstances. The Department of Defense updated its guidelines for military personnel dealing with civilian authorities, specifically addressing HOA confrontations. They now provide training scenarios based on this incident to help service members understand their rights when dealing with overzealous civilian officials. Veterans' rights organizations use the case to highlight the ongoing discrimination some veterans face in civilian communities. Karen's emails and past actions showed a clear pattern of bias against military families, and this helped spark conversations about protecting veterans from housing discrimination. On the HOA side, national organizations issued guidance reminding boards about the limits of their authority. Several insurance companies that provide liability coverage for HOAs specifically excluded coverage for actions against military property or personnel, citing the Karen case as the reason. The case even made it into law school textbooks as an example of federal supremacy and the serious consequences of crimes against government property. Professor friends tell me it's become a favorite case study because it so clearly illustrates multiple legal principles while also being entertainingly absurd. As someone who served for over 2 decades, this incident hit close to home. I've seen my share of anti-military sentiment, but it usually comes from protesters or political activists, not from a neighbor in a military community. Karen's actions represented a special kind of entitlement. The belief that a small amount of local power gave her authority over federal military operations. Throughout my Navy career, I operated under strict rules of engagement. We were taught to respect civilian authority whenever possible, to de-escalate conflicts, and to always maintain professional bearing. Lieutenant Rodriguez and his crew exemplified these values during their confrontation with Karen. They didn't argue, didn't escalate, and followed proper procedures by reporting the vandalism through official channels. But here's what really gets me. Karen targeted these sailors while they were dealing with equipment repairs. The Mark 6 wasn't there for fun. It was there because something needed to be fixed so the boat could return to protecting our waters. These young men and women were doing their jobs, serving their country, and she treated them like unwelcome intruders. The Navy takes care of its own, though. The way NCIS and the federal prosecutors pursued this case sent a clear message. Mess with our people or our property, and we'll use every legal tool at our disposal to hold you accountable. That $450,000 fine wasn't just about money. It was about respect. After Karen's conviction, our community had to heal. Her divisive leadership had created factions, military families versus longtime civilian residents, enforcement hardliners versus those who wanted more relaxed rules. The new HOA board, led by a retired Air Force colonel named Jim Patterson, made reconciliation a priority. Jim organized town halls where everyone could air their grievances. It turned out Karen had been selectively enforcing rules, targeting military families while ignoring violations by her supporters. Some civilian residents were genuinely shocked to learn about the discrimination their military neighbors had faced. These meetings led to a complete overhaul of HOA policies. The new board instituted a military liaison position, specifically to address concerns from service members and veterans. They also created an appeals process for fines and violations, ending the arbitrary enforcement that had characterized Karen's regime. The community started organizing events that brought everyone together. Monthly potlucks, holiday celebrations, and volunteer workdays helped rebuild trust. The marina became a gathering place rather than a source of conflict, with the new board organizing fishing tournaments and boat safety classes. Most importantly, the new leadership emphasized that Bayshore Heights was a community that honored service while welcoming all law-abiding residents. Military families no longer felt like they had to hide their service. American flags flew proudly, and no one complained about military vehicles or uniforms. The case of United States versus Fitzgerald, yes, that became its official name, set several important legal precedents. First, it established that HOA officials who vandalize federal property in the course of enforcing HOA rules face the same penalties as any other vandal. The court rejected the defense that Karen was acting in her official capacity. Second, it clarified that military vessels in civilian marinas under official agreements remain fully under federal jurisdiction. HOAs have no authority to regulate, fine, or interfere with these vessels in any way. This was important because some HOAs near military bases had been trying to impose restrictions on military vehicles and equipment. Third, the case established enhanced penalties for patterns of harassment against military personnel. Karen's history of targeting veterans in the neighborhood was considered an aggravating factor in sentencing. This has been cited in subsequent cases where civilians have systematically harassed service members. The $450,000 fine also set a precedent for calculating damages in military vandalism cases. The court accepted the prosecution's argument that the true cost included not just repairs, but all associated security reviews, operational disruptions, and investigation expenses. This comprehensive approach to damages has been applied in similar cases since. Legal scholars have noted that the case represents a perfect storm of federal authority, military justice, and civilian overreach. It's become a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks local authority supersedes federal law. The impact of Karen's actions rippled out in ways none of us could have predicted. The story went viral on military social media groups, becoming a rallying cry for service members who had dealt with similar discrimination. Hashtags like HOA Karen and Respect Military started trending. Military-friendly real estate agents began using the incident as a teaching moment, advising service members to research HOA attitudes before buying homes. Some agents started specifically marketing communities as veteran-friendly and highlighting HOA boards with military representation. The Navy itself used the incident for positive PR. They highlighted how the professional response of Lieutenant Rodriguez and his crew exemplified Navy values. The service also used it as an opportunity to educate civilians about the importance of naval operations and the need for cooperation between military and civilian communities. Karen became something of a cautionary meme in military circles. Photos of spray-painted boats would circulate with captions like, "When you forget federal law exists," or HOA Karen strikes again. While some felt the mockery went too far, most saw it as a harmless way to process an absurd situation. Local businesses near military bases started advertising themselves as military-friendly more prominently, not wanting to be associated with the kind of discrimination Karen represented. Some even offered discounts to service members specifically to distance themselves from the incident. The Karen incident sparked a broader conversation about HOA reform. Horror stories from other communities surfaced. HOAs that had banned military flags, fined families for deployment-related lawn care lapses, or harassed veterans over service-related disabilities. Several veterans organizations launched campaigns to reform HOA laws at the state level. They pushed for legislation that would prohibit HOAs from restricting military flags and symbols, provide exemptions for military families dealing with deployments, prevent discrimination based on military service, require HOA boards to include community representation. Some of these efforts succeeded. 3 states passed military family protection acts that limited HOA power over service members. These laws specifically cited the Karen case as evidence of the need for protection. HOA management companies started requiring board members to undergo training on federal law and discrimination. Insurance companies began insisting on it, not wanting to be liable for another Karen-style incident. The training specifically covered military rights and the limits of HOA authority. The Community Associations Institute, a national organization for HOA professionals, issued best practices, guidelines for dealing with military members. They emphasized respect, communication, and understanding federal supremacy in military matters. About 18 months after her conviction, Karen tried to rehabilitate her image. She started a blog called Lessons Learned, where she claimed to share insights from her experience. She portrayed herself as a victim of federal overreach and argued that she was just trying to maintain neighborhood standards. The blog was a disaster. Military veterans and legal experts quickly debunked her claims. Screenshots of her old emails surfaced, showing her clear anti-military bias. The federal prosecutor even issued a statement reminding people that Karen had been convicted based on overwhelming evidence, not persecution. She tried to do a podcast interview with a sympathetic host, but it backfired spectacularly. When asked about the $450,000 fine, she claimed it was excessive for a little paint. The host surprisingly pushed back, noting that she had vandalized a $15 million military asset. Karen's attempts to deflect only made her look worse. The final nail in her comeback attempt came when the Veterans Food Bank, where she was doing community service, issued a statement. They confirmed she was fulfilling her service requirements, but noted she had shown minimal remorse or understanding of her actions' impact. They requested she be reassigned to a different organization. After these failed attempts, Karen largely disappeared from public view. Her blog went dark, and she stopped trying to tell her side of the story. Perhaps she finally realized that some actions can't be spun or explained away. Today, Bayshore Heights is a model military-friendly community. The marina hosts Coast Guard auxiliary training, Navy League events, and veterans gatherings. The slip where the Mark VI was vandalized now bears a small plaque reading, "In honor of those who served, let no one forget." Property values have actually increased since the incident. It turns out that being known as a community that supports veterans and maintains proper security is attractive to buyers. The new HOA focuses on real improvements, updated landscaping, better security lighting, and community amenities. The annual Bayshore Heights Veterans Day celebration has become a regional event. Last year, over 500 people attended, including active duty personnel from the nearby base. Lieutenant Rodriguez, now Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, was the guest of honor. He spoke about how the community's response to the vandalism had restored his faith in civilian-military relations. The HOA's new policies have become a template for other communities. They include clear exemptions for military displays and vehicles, a military liaison on the board deployment grace periods for property maintenance, priority marina access for military vessels under official agreements, an annual scholarship for military children. Jim Patterson, the HOA president, often speaks at conferences about transforming toxic HOA cultures. He uses Karen as an example of what happens when power goes unchecked and bias goes unchallenged. His message: HOAs should enhance communities, not divide them. The Karen incident offers crucial lessons for HOA boards everywhere. Know your limitations. HOA authority ends where federal law begins. No amount of local power can override federal jurisdiction, especially regarding military matters. Check your bias. Karen's anti-military sentiment clouded her judgment and led to her downfall. Boards must examine their own biases and ensure equal Treatment for all residents. Document carefully. The security footage that convicted Karen also protected the marina and HOA from potential lawsuits. Proper documentation protects everyone. Communicate professionally. Lieutenant Rodriguez's professional response contrasted sharply with Karen's emotional outbursts. Military personnel are trained to document and report through proper channels. Understand. Consequences. Vandalism is vandalism regardless of motivation. Claiming to enforce HOA rules doesn't provide immunity from federal prosecution. Respect service. Communities near military installations should acknowledge and respect the service of their military neighbors. They're not intruders, they're protectors. Reform. When necessary. The old Bayshore Heights HOA needed complete reform. Sometimes toxic leadership requires total replacement, not minor adjustments. From the military's standpoint, the Karen incident highlighted vulnerabilities they hadn't fully considered. While bases have extensive security, military assets in civilian areas operate under different protocols. The incident led to several changes. The Navy updated its agreements with civilian marinas, adding specific language about federal jurisdiction and consequences for interference. They also improved communication protocols to ensure local authorities understand when military vessels will be present. Security assessments now include evaluation of local HOA policies and leadership. Military. Families receive briefings about potential HOA issues when moving to new installations. The services also created legal resources specifically for dealing with HOA disputes. The incident reinforced the importance of maintaining professional bearing when dealing with difficult civilians. Lieutenant Rodriguez's crew became an example. In training scenarios, they documented everything, followed protocols, and let the system work rather than escalating the confrontation. Military legal offices near bases increased their focus on civilian-military disputes. They now proactively work with local communities to prevent conflicts before they escalate to Karen-level disasters. As I stand on my deck today, looking out at the marina where this all happened, I'm struck by how much has changed. The slipware, the Mark VI, was vandalized, is now a symbol of community resilience rather than division. Children play on the docks where federal agents once collected evidence. Veterans and civilians share coffee at the Marina Cafe, united by genuine community spirit rather than divided by petty rules. Karen's downfall wasn't just about spray paint on a boat. It was about the collision between entitled local authority and federal law, between discrimination and justice, between division and community. Her $450,000 fine sent a message that echoes far beyond our small neighborhood. Respect for those who serve isn't optional, and federal law isn't subject to HOA interpretation. The Navy patrol boat returned to service, its hull pristine and its mission unchanged. But it carries with it a story, a reminder that even in civilian communities, military assets and personnel are protected by the full weight of federal law. That protection isn't about special treatment, it's about ensuring those who defend our nation can do their jobs without interference from petty tyrants. For those serving in uniform who face discrimination in their communities, remember this: the law is on your side. Document everything, report through proper channels, and let the system work. Karen thought she was untouchable, but she learned that federal prosecutors and $450,000 fines have a way of adjusting attitudes. What truly made the difference in our story wasn't just the federal response, it was how the community came together afterward. When faced with the ugly reality of Karen's discrimination, Bayshore Heights had a choice: sweep it under the rug or confront it head-on. We chose confrontation and emerged stronger. The veterans who testified against Karen showed courage. It would have been easier to stay quiet to avoid the spotlight. But they stood up not just for themselves but for every service member who might face similar discrimination. Their testimony helped secure that $450,000 fine and sent a clear message about community values. The civilian residents who supported reform also deserve credit. They could have circled the wagons around Karen, defended the status quo, or minimized what happened. Instead, they acknowledged the wrong that had been done and worked to make things right. That's real community spirit. The new HOA board's military-friendly policies weren't just window dressing. They represented a fundamental shift in how the community viewed its military neighbors, from burden to blessing, from outsiders to honored residents. That transformation happened because people chose to do better. For military families dealing with difficult HOAs, here's my advice, based on our experience. Know your rights. Federal law protects military displays, provides certain exemptions, and supersedes HOA rules in many cases. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Document everything, every interaction, every threat, every fine. Karen might have avoided federal charges if there hadn't been such clear documentation of her pattern of behavior. Use your chain of command. The military has legal resources to help with civilian disputes. Lieutenant Rodriguez's quick reporting triggered the appropriate federal response. Connect with other veterans in your community. There's strength in numbers, and you might be surprised how many allies you have. Stay professional. Karen's emotional outbursts contrasted with military professionalism. Take the high road. It pays off in court. Don't accept discrimination. What starts as minor harassment can escalate to federal crimes, as Karen learned. Address problems early through proper channels. Consider HOA involvement. The best way to change a toxic HOA is from within. Our new board's military leadership transformed the community. 2 years later, United States versus Fitzgerald continues to influence military-civilian relations. The case is now required reading at JAG schools and is cited in training for base commanders. Dealing with civilian authorities. The $450,000 fine remains one of the largest ever assessed for vandalism of military property by a civilian. Legal scholars point to several key aspects of the case. First, the court's rejection of the official HOA capacity defense. Karen argued she was acting as HOA president, not as a private citizen. The court ruled that official positions don't provide immunity for federal crimes. This precedent protects military assets from interference by local officials who might claim authority they don't have. Second, the comprehensive damage calculation. By including investigation costs, security reviews, and operational disruptions in the $450,000 fine, the court recognized that crimes against military property have far-reaching consequences. This approach has been applied in subsequent cases, ensuring that perpetrators face the full cost of their actions. Third, the pattern of discrimination as an aggravating factor. Karen's history of targeting military families elevated her crime from simple vandalism to something more serious. This precedent helps protect service members from systematic harassment in their communities. The case also influenced federal sentencing guidelines. Vandalism of military property now carries enhanced penalties when committed by individuals in positions of authority who abuse that authority to target military personnel or assets. The media coverage of Karen's case was extensive and largely sympathetic to the military. Editorial boards across the country condemned her actions, with one major newspaper calling it an shocking display of entitled ignorance meets federal reality. Military publications had a field day, with Navy Times running a series on HOA discrimination that won journalism awards. Social media reaction was swift and harsh. HOA Karen trended for weeks, with memes depicting everything from spray-painted aircraft carriers to HOA board members trying to tow tanks. While some felt the online mockery went too far, it reflected genuine outrage at Karen's actions. The case sparked countless discussions on veterans forums and military spouse groups. Stories poured in from around the country about HOA discrimination. Some were minor annoyances, others were serious enough to warrant legal action. Karen had inadvertently become the face of a national problem. Talk shows and podcasts featured segments on the case, Legal experts explained federal supremacy, military advocates discussed discrimination, and HOA representatives tried to distance their organizations from Karen's actions. The consensus was clear. Karen had crossed a line that should never be crossed. Public opinion polls showed overwhelming support for the prosecution and the $450,000 fine. Even those who normally complained about government overreach agreed that vandalizing military property deserved serious consequences. Karen had achieved the impossible, uniting people across political divides in condemning her actions. The Karen incident prompted institutional changes beyond just our community. The Department of Defense issued new guidelines for military-civilian interactions, specifically addressing HOA disputes. These guidelines help service members understand their rights and provide clear escalation procedures. Military Family Support Services added HOA education to their newcomer briefings. Families moving to civilian communities now receive information about potential HOA issues and resources for addressing them. This proactive approach helps prevent conflicts before they start. The Navy updated its port security procedures to include assessment of local civilian authorities. When military vessels use civilian facilities, advanced teams now brief local officials about federal jurisdiction and the consequences of interference. No one wants another Karen situation. HOA management companies instituted new training requirements, focusing on federal law and military rights. Some companies now require board members to sign acknowledgments that they understand the limits of HOA authority. Insurance companies often insist on this training to maintain coverage. Legal aid organizations serving military families expanded their services to include HOA disputes. They recognize that housing discrimination can take many forms, including targeted enforcement of HOA rules. These organizations now provide free consultation for service members facing HOA harassment. The case of HOA Karen and the $450,000 fine represents a turning point in military-civilian relations. It demonstrated that discrimination against service members won't be tolerated, that federal law has teeth, and that communities can reform themselves when confronted with injustice. For every Karen who thinks local authority trumps federal law, there's now a cautionary tale. For every HOA board considering discriminatory enforcement, there's a $450,000 reminder of the consequences. For every military family facing harassment, there's proof that the system can work. Bayshore Heights transformed from a divided community into a model of military-civilian cooperation. The marina that once hosted a federal crime scene now hosts celebrations of service. The HOA that once targeted veterans now actively supports them. Change is possible when communities choose justice over power. As I finish telling this story, I can see boats coming and going from our marina. Some are civilian pleasure craft, others are military vessels conducting training. They share the same water, follow the same navigation rules, and respect each other's presence. That's how it should be. Different missions, but mutual respect. Karen's spray paint washed off easily enough, but the lessons from her actions remain indelible. Federal law isn't optional. Military service deserves respect. HOA power has limits. And sometimes karma comes with a $450,000 price tag. So there you have it. The complete story of how one entitled HOA president thought she could vandalize a United States Navy patrol boat and ended up with a $450,000 fine, federal conviction, and the complete destruction of her life as she knew it. If you're a service member facing discrimination in your community, remember that you have rights and resources. Document everything, use your chain of command, and don't accept harassment as just the way things are. Change is possible, as our community proved. If you're an HOA board member, take this as a warning. Your authority has limits, and those limits are clearly defined by federal law. Respect military families in your community, understand federal supremacy, and remember that discrimination has consequences. If you're a civilian living near military families, be a good neighbor. These men and women serve our country and deserve respect in their own communities. Stand up against discrimination when you see it. Your voice matters in creating positive change. And if you're someone who thinks local authority gives you the right to interfere with military operations or harass service members, remember Karen? Remember the spray paint, the handcuffs, the federal agents, and that $450,000 fine. Remember that karma has a way of catching up. And when it involves the United States military, karma comes with federal prosecutors. Thank you for joining me on this wild ride through one of the most insane HOA stories ever told. Like and subscribe. If you want to hear more stories of justice served and karma delivered, share this video with anyone who needs a reminder about respecting our service members. And remember, no HOA rule is worth a federal felony. Until next time, this is Channel Name, reminding you to respect those who serve, know your rights, and never ever vandalize military property. Stay safe, stay legal, and stay out of federal prison. Thank you for watching today's incredible story of justice served. If you enjoyed this video, check out our playlist of other instant karma stories where entitled people learned the hard way that actions have consequences. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest videos. Leave a comment below with your own HOA horror stories. Who knows, your story might be featured in our next video. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to help spread awareness about respecting our military families. Until next time, stay strong, support our troops, and keep watching for more amazing stories of karma and justice.